Let's now look at the last process in the integration management knowledge area, and that is of close the project or the phase. Quick reminder, and that's that this process is certainly used as the last thing you do when closing a project. However, if you've split your project into phases or stages, whichever you want to call them, then you may carry this out at the end of every stage, if you will, to make sure everything's closed down properly, as we'll see exactly what happens here, and prepare for, let's say it's an end stage assessment or some form of gate review before the project proceeds to the next. But let's for the moment consider that this is going to be used for closing a project. As I've said, it forms part of the integration management knowledge area. It's within the closing process group, one of only two processes. Don't forget the other one is to close procurements, but much more of that in a later module. And the purpose here is to focus on shutting the project down properly or shutting the phase down properly, ready to review whether the project should proceed any further. Let's have a look at the inputs. By the way, there's another good reason for doing this that is worth mentioning, and that's that I've seen many projects carry on with everybody doing apparently housekeeping exercises, all the while booking time and cost to the project, ending up with the project being over budget and coming in late, and of course the end product being delayed, put into operational use where potential benefits could be earned. So having a process for this makes sure it's shut down efficiently and effectively. In fact, I quite like the phrase controlled shutdown because that's the main objective of this particular process. The main input here, of course, is the project management plan, since that's the baseline references against which we can decide that the project or the phase is indeed done and it should be shut down. We have the organisational process assets. In this case, it could be lessons learned that should be applied to this project, but more than likely it is procedures, templates and guidance, for example, on how to carry this out in an effective and efficient manner. I suppose the main input here really should be the accepted deliverables in terms of importance for sure, since unless the deliverables have been accepted, we really shouldn't be shutting the project down or the phase. If it's a phase we're shutting down or a stage, then it will be the accepted deliverables for that particular phase or stage. But I guess that's sort of obvious. Let's look at the outputs. The main one, of course, being the final product, or it might be a final service, or the result, transition. What do we mean by transition? Well, because what we're concerned about is not the product itself, we've already got that here if you remember, but that it is transited into its operational life. In other words, it's been accepted and handed over to those who will now use it to realise benefits within either your organisation or another organisation. How the handover occurs will vary, of course, by the nature of the project. If it's a large piece of machinery, the execution may have been building it on the customer site. So this will be a documentation handover rather than a physical end product handover. Now, the main purpose of closing a project is about making sure all necessary documentation is dealt with, and most of it will need to be archived. Capturing the lessons learned. If you have a lessons learned log, then the project manager may take that information and produce a report and hand that and the information on the log over to, for example, a project office so that these lessons can be passed on to future projects. Don't forget that if this project has a contract, then we will use the closed procurements process to make sure that happens first before this one. Be quite clear, perhaps it's worth making a note. You don't close the project down, then close procurements. It's the other way around. Watch out for any questions on that. You close the procurements first because they form part of the project, and you can't close it until all of the products of the project have been formally accepted. Here's accepted deliverables. So if it has a contract, one of them is acceptance that the contracted work and its products has been also accepted. And the other thing, of course, is passing on any updates you may have made to any of the assets you've been using throughout the project. You may find yourself refining or adding to any procedures or guidelines, or in the light of experience, you may have found some information has been omitted. Remember, you need to play your part in ensuring future projects are always successful. Looking at the tools, no surprises here. Meetings, often agreeing that the deliverables can be passed into operational life, will be done via a meeting with appropriate customer, users, suppliers, etc. present. Analytical techniques may be used when looking at root causes to help write up lessons learned, as an example. And expert judgment, of course, because you'll almost certainly need appropriate stakeholders involved or experts as part of ensuring a smooth transition from project to operations of the final product, service or result. So let's now look at a summary of closed project or phase. What we're doing here is gathering project records and disseminating information in order to gain project product acceptance and to perform project closure. I've made the point already that the closed project or phase process may be used for each project phase if that's appropriate. It doesn't have to, but it's certainly used as part of closed project. Let's now add in the key activities which should reinforce my comments on the closed project or phase process itself. So, review and update the project documents as and if required. Update your resource assignments, including, here's an interesting one, advising folks that you need them as part of the closing project activities, or maybe letting them go, returning them to their parent part of the organisation, for example, for internal resources, or in terms of contractors, advising them that as per their terms and conditions, their contract is now complete. Hopefully that shouldn't be a surprise to them. Document the project outcomes. Hopefully this will be entirely good news. Request formal acceptance from stakeholders and the customer. This will normally be a formal written document as a minimum. Analyse the project management processes to determine their effectiveness. Again, this can be helpful in the next point, which is document the lessons learned. There may be lessons to be learned from the way in which your management processes, and I'm not talking about the PMBOK guide here, I'm talking about the methodology you use, and to add them to any lessons learned. Archive all project documentation for future historical reference and for potential audits. Now, it's probably worth just making a point here that sometimes, for all the right reasons hopefully, projects need to be terminated. And if that's the case, you would still want to carry out, even if this happens part-way through where you intended to have the end of a phase or stage, then this process could be triggered, and we'd go through this as a way of shutting down a premature project as well. Now, please make a note of that. I haven't seen it documented anywhere, but it is important that you'd still want to shut down premature closures in a controlled manner, although some of these wouldn't be entirely necessary. For example, you wouldn't have acceptance of handing over the end product, but you'd as a minimum need acceptance from your customer or users that it's the right thing to do and that they will now no longer have the end product. You might want to add to this some form of plan because, of course, if you've got products which are partway complete and you've decided to shut the project down, they are still assets and you may want to, in some way, make them more valuable to your company. I imagine if you were building an office block and the bank pulled the plug and now you've got a building site with lots of building materials and expensive plant on it, well, you'd want to make that site safe. You might want to sell it off, at least to refurbish your costs for the investment in the site. You might want to sell off the materials and equipment and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's quickly look at the outputs. Final product, service or result transition. This is actually acceptance of the final product, service or result, and this should be handed over to whichever organisation it is, yours or someone else. Normally requires a formal sign-off, which of course will be legally binding. Organisational process assets updates. The formal sign-off of the acceptance of the product is documented and archived here for future reference. A warranty period may start from this point in time. There's an interesting point. Project records and files are archived. Here's a few examples. I won't go through them all, but they're all fairly obvious. Planning, scope, budget, cost information, schedule, risks, and so on and so forth. All of these, although they're being archived, may be of some use as an asset for future projects, but certainly for audits should it be necessary.